Dear friends, welcome to the Priest Podcast, sponsored by the Napa Institute. You may not know it, but one of Napa's most meaningful efforts involves the formation and support of priests and religious. We have become fascinated by the stories of our clergy. Through this podcast, we want to bring you some of these amazing stories too, but in a way that is unique. Priests interviewing other priests from all walks of life and backgrounds. We think this series will be a great resource for everyone, those considering the priesthood, as well as those in active ministry who may be struggling or just looking for good ideas. But even the laity will benefit by learning more about the needs and thoughts of the clergy as we consider how to support and pray for them, given all they do for us. So sit back and enjoy this glimpse into the life and work of the priest. In today's episode, Msgr Roger Landry will interview Father John Burns.
Hello, everyone. This is Msgr Roger Landry, National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies, and today's host for the Shepherd Circle podcast produced by the Napa Institute. I'm delighted to be able to welcome today Father John Burns of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee and founder or co-founder of Friends of the Bridegroom, an awesome new initiative to try to reform the church by helping women's religious vocations in the country. He was ordained a priest in 2010 and has since served in various assignments, including some time in Rome getting his doctorate. I'm excited to hear him speak about all his priestly experiences. Father Burns, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Monsignor. It's good to call you Monsignor, too, instead of Father.
Thank you for that. I would love to start with what it was like to grow up in your home. I know you're not the only special vocation in your family. Talk to me about how the domestic church of the Burns family really influenced your growth in faith such that you were courageous enough to say yes to the call of the Lord.
Yeah, one of four, oldest of four kids. Just a kind of classic Catholic family. Mom and dad, believers, going to Mass every Sunday, prayer before meals, rosary in the car, that kind of stuff. So we grew up with the faith, but it wasn't super intense. There wasn't a lot of vocational conversation at young ages, though there was always like the invitation to be open to everything. I would say a massive contributing factor. My dad, when I was 15, and I was the oldest of four with a 10-year span, when I was 15, he was injured during a routine sinus surgery. Brain damaged for massive brain surgeries, never recovered his mobility, and again, the brain damage never fully recovered as well. But he drew us out of ourselves. We had to serve in a different way, starting in high school or middle school for, elementary school for little ones, just taking care of our father and helping him to get dressed in the morning or to shower or helping him to move around different appointments. And so my family shared an experience of suffering together that was hard to articulate outside to other people because you just didn't know how to explain this to your high school friends. But my dad's faith through the whole thing grew. And he became a daily mass goer, a man who read the scriptures every day, and he never complained. He always said, this is the lot that the Lord has dealt with, is my hand, and what do? I can either be upset about it or I can just continue on the way and make the most of what I've got. And it was just so inspiring across many, many years. And I believe that drew each of us into a deep friendship within the family and an openness to realize that there's just much more to life and it's a fragile reality. We can lose it all. So I began to discern at the same time that my brother discerned the priesthood. We didn't know that. I was out of college. He was just graduating high school and moving up into graduation. And we both were asking the question at the same time. Hadn't really told our parents about it. Different routes to the discernment. He entered college seminary, but I entered afterwards. And we were ordained 3 years apart. That were 6 years apart. So it's awesome having a brother priest, toss around homily ideas, bail each other out on various situations, cover masses. And then our two sisters are very close with us as well. And so they're both married wonderfully and having children now. And so giving us a lot of nieces and nephews to run around and play with. So just a beautiful journey of suffering redeemed and really see my father as the sacrificial lamb that inspired us. And by his own suffering, which I know he wouldn't take back or change, we were called out of ourselves into the Lord's will.
Did you pray at home when you were growing up in a concrete way?
Yeah, again, prayer before meals, invited to, active contrition in the evenings, a little bit of that here and there, prayer book for Holy Communion that Mom would encourage us to flip through. We were homeschooled for 5 years. Up until my dad got sick, we had to all go back to school. Those years, daily Mass became a little bit more normative, as did just journaling. And Mom was genius. Before the Holy Hour was kind of normative, she just required us as teacher, to do quiet time, it was called. We had to go to our rooms, no radio. We didn't have screens at the time, but nothing but just prayer. We could bring a book of the saints, a Bible, and a journal, and that was all. It was a half hour first, moved to an hour eventually an hour and a half by the time we were getting up toward high school. And when you just have all that space, you end up talking to God, and prayer becomes very dialogical. And I began at that point asking questions like, I wonder if I should spend more of my life for you, Lord, and more time in prayer, because I was finding prayer fulfilling. So organically, it was woven into the way we lived. But again, it wasn't like down your throat or rigorous. It was just kind of a part of the rhythm.
Were there any figures beyond your dad that were instrumental in helping you become more aware of the vocation God had given you before you were conceived in the womb? Parish priests, saints, women religious who promoted you by their own total self-giving love for the Lord to give a similar self-gift? What were the influences for you?
Yeah, we can come back to the sisters because I didn't encounter them at all, and I felt that absence later. We had no women religious substantially or meaningfully in our lives as kids. A funny influence, as you asked the question, I realized 2 different girlfriends that I was dating, one of whom especially I thought I would marry, but then experiencing in my own heart this like limit, like I couldn't fall in love the way I wanted to. And I thought something was wrong with me at first, but to both of them, one in high school, one in college, I asked if they thought I'd make a good priest. And like, I couldn't admit that I was discerning the priesthood, but that's not the kind of question you ask your girlfriend, And they both were like, why are you asking me that? So that was a little pinpoint for me. Like, I better come back to that someday when I hit several other dead ends later. But during college, a new pastor came to our parish, and he just loved preaching and had a lot of life experience and seemed happy. And I hadn't seen a priest who looked and acted happy and was really vibrant in the way he proclaimed the gospel. So that was an eye-opener. I wasn't ready to discern yet, but it was Cardinal Dolan, Archbishop at the time, who had an interaction with him, and he just, as he was able to do, he just spotted it and said, "You're running away from the priesthood, aren't you?" And I'm like, yeah, I start crying a little bit. I'm like, how'd you see that? So he was like the chief. He's the father of my vocation. The one time I met the Pope, that's the only thing that came out of my mouth. I was nervous. I'm like, he just made Archbishop Dolan a cardinal. I'm like, Cardinal Dolan's the father of my vocation. Thanks, Holiness. Kissed his ring, and he moved on.
Beautiful. So you went to college and studied what? Business
marketing. I was at Notre Dame, had a minor in theology, which a later study out of BC showed typically we'll minor in something we love, we'll major in something we think is useful. So I studied business marketing. My family was in restaurants, so I thought I might end up going that route. So marketing seemed to make sense and useful. But I loved theology. My intellectual conversion came through John Cavadini. That would be another influence. And I was actually just taking the easy A class.
John Cavadini, for listeners who don't know who he is one of the top theologians in the country who teaches at Notre Dame and has really been a father to so many younger theologians who have been able to get from him a clear trumpet that comes from the choirs of heaven. I mean, he really sets them on a sure path. So John Cavadini had an influence?
Masterfully, because in his wisdom and that of the university, the easy A, everybody had to take theology. The easy A class, known to be the football players class, was Pillars of the Christian Faith. And I took it simply to get through an easy class and deal with my other coursework. And all he did was walk us through the catechism, just like a section by section, paragraph by paragraph, just teaching us what the church teaches. And it was the first time that I understood the why. Like, I grew up knowing the what of what we do, but it didn't animate me. And all of a sudden I'm seeing connections and realizing where this teaching comes from and implications of Scripture upon my life. And it was just like fireworks in my brain the whole time. Like, I hate to admit this, but I'm falling in love with theology and with the Lord because I had my own design on my life. And clearly that wasn't the Lord's plan, but that class is when intellectually I converted. My moral conversion would come later when I was ready to like really give my life over.
And when was that? So there's a point in every priest's life in which it's clear that the Lord is calling us to become a priest, or at least have the courage to let go of other possibilities and enter the seminary. When was that for you, and what precipitated it?
Well, very long story, truncated gravely. After college, skipped on the job offer that I had dreamed of, just didn't feel right. Worked for a year to save up money. Because my dad had gotten sick, I had the kind of carpe diem mindset. I wanted to experience life before I settled down. So I went backpacking for 5 months through Asia, Australia, New Zealand. And I kid you not, like a culmination of the whole vocational journey, I ran out of money, got a job on a prawn trawler, like a giant shrimp boat in the northeast coast of Australia. Spent a month at sea. And 2.5 weeks into that trip, I had to do all the grub work because I was the greenest deckhand, they called it. So I had to do the late night and afternoon work. And I'm sitting on the deck, sun's going down, dolphins leaping, everything's golden, gorgeous, and I'm mending the nets. And it was one of these moments I look up, I'm like, this is amazing. And I look at the nets and I start to laugh and cry at the same time. I'm like, I see what you've done. And I realized on the other side of the world, having had all these, I was bungee jumping, skydiving, scuba diving, mountain climbing, glacier hiking, out on a shrimp boat. And I had all the same questions that I had in my heart back home. And I was running away from those questions. And the priesthood question that I asked that first girlfriend in high school was still there. And I'd never confronted it. He's like, I'm calling you, go home and sort this out. And I just fell apart, came home, talked to Dolan, and the rest is history.
And so you entered St. Francis Seminary? Where'd you go?
I was sent to Catholic U, to theological college. Again, Archbishop at the time, Dolan's wisdom there. He knew I was moving to D.C. I was going to work for the Center for Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, a Bush office. And he knew my buddies were there. He knew I wanted to go there. So he said, well, just go there. You can live in this building where some of the guys thinking about priesthood live, which is a seminary, but he didn't put it in those terms, And so he was able to kind of give me easy stepping stones. He was on the board at TC, and so they wanted him to send a guy.
TC is Theological College.
Exactly. So I was just timed right. I mean, it was perfect for him to fulfill that request or obligation. So a year and a half there, and then over to the North American College in Rome for theology.
And so you go over to Rome. What was your experience like at the Pontifical North American College?
Yeah, it was beautiful. I mean, to meet priests from all around the country outside of my diocese. I like language. I obviously like to travel. I'd already been traveling a good bit. So that was good. I was actually skeptical, hesitant. I didn't want to go over there to be around ambition. The reputation, of ladder climbing and ambition, I brought that to Archbishop Dolan. I wasn't excited about it. Instead, I found excellent men. My best friends are my classmates. A group of 7 of us get together every single year for a long, long trip. And it was edifying. And I'm the priest I am because of a couple of those guys just calling me to holiness constantly and keeping me accountable to that call.
And so you studied for 3 years in order to get a bachelor's in theology. Where'd you go?
The Gregorian. So 3 years for the STB at the Gregorian.
The Jesuits primarily there at the Gregorian. And then did you have a choice at what you wanted to study for a degree beyond that? Or what did Cardinal Dolan assign you to, or was it Archbishop Listecki at the time, assigned you to study morals?
Tiny little gap between the two. Dolan had moved. Bishop Callahan was the administrator, and he was taking advice from Bishop Morlino, who loved Santa Croce at the time. So he just told me, I'm going to Santa Croce to study bioethics, moral theology, but to focus on bioethics, which wasn't very interesting to me, in fact, and I hadn't thought of Santa Croce. Listecki then came in and ratified that choice, but said, you don't have to worry about bioethics unless you want to, just get a degree in moral theology. So I spent 2 more years at Santa Croce with Opus Dei, learning my moral theology.
And eventually you would be sent back to Santa Croce to get your doctorate. What did you write on as you were getting your doctorate in moral theology?
So I was in the field of moral theology. I knew I had to find something that would be, I didn't want to go back for a doctorate. I was in a perfect parish, and it was the only time I've had to obey that was really difficult. Normally it's a consultative obedience that we all deal with, the diocesan priesthood, but this was a tough one to leave that place and go study. So I had to find something that was interesting to me in a question or an inquiry that I had not had good answers for in the parish. So anger was a constant referent point in counseling and in confessions, and questions of how do I forgive? I don't know how to forgive. I know I'm supposed to, but I don't know how to do that. So forgiveness and healing around forgiveness were kind of percolating questions for me. So I ended up accelerating this part of the conversation, ended up writing on the intersection between grace and psychology. So weaving St. Thomas Aquinas' work with that of a secular psychologist whose work is widely peer-reviewed and very successful in showing that what works in psychology only works because it actually comes from the tradition. It coheres with our anthropology. When we bring that back into the tradition, we can say a lot more from the theological perspective about what happens when we forgive and how that heals us.
Great. Let's get to your priestly ordination. So after 4 years in Rome, you returned to Milwaukee in order to be ordained. What do you remember about the day of your ordination?
Yeah, just the greatest day of my life. Truly, it was extraordinary. Kind of like a wedding day. I see people describe, like you forget a lot, you're buried, you're running around the whole time. But some of the really crystal clear details of the ordination itself, I will never forget the imposition of hands. Receiving the chalice from my bishop, placing my hands in his hands in the promise of obedience, and then just being vested by that same priest who was an inspiration to me at my parish. And the moment, beyond, obviously the prostration is so beautiful, and I'm snotting on the floor of the cathedral. I was a blubbery mess. It was embarrassing but beautiful. But the moment when you're vested, and you sat with your parents, as you came in, you sit with your mom and dad. And then after ordination, you go over and sit with the priests. And that was like such a decisive moment for me where I was like, wow, I am changed. I sit in a different place. I come from my family, but I don't return to my family. I belong with this brotherhood over here. And that was I sat down, I looked around, I was all smiles. I'm like, wow, these are my guys now. Like, I'm a priest here. It's just I felt like a little kid. I was so excited about it.
And so the following day you had your first Mass. What was that like?
Yeah, such a joy. I couldn't believe it. Like, I finished Mass, and out loud, I just was like, I just confected the Eucharist, you guys. I can't believe this happened. The room kind of erupted because it was so informal, but I just was so taken by holding the host and realizing that yesterday, if I said these same words, nothing happens. Today I say them, and this is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of my Lord and Savior, and I can bring that to the people, my family, my friends. And that was just, it was a lot of tears. I for the first couple of years of priesthood, I experienced tears during consecration because I just still can't believe we get to do that. Like, what a sacred privilege. So the first one was just greatest thing I've ever done. And I'm blessed to be able to do it every day.
And so Archbishop Listecki assigned you as a parochial vicar. Tell me about your first assignment.
Yeah, 3 years at Christ King in Wauwatosa, west side of the city. A great community. I'm still very close with a lot of those parishioners. It was just kind of a perfect place to begin. A nice big school, a nice big parish, but only one parish. And so I split the masses with the pastor, who was nearing retirement and ended up retiring while I was there. So he retired early. I had another administrator come in, and then I had a third. I had the next guy who came in was the next pastor. So I had 3 bosses in a short time in 3 years, which I learned a lot, some of it in the Via Negativa and learning what not to do and how to walk a lot of tenuous lines. But it was a great assignment. I learned so much, and I still go back. An MC, a missionary of charity, later said to me, your first assignment is really like your first love. Your first mission is first love, and it never really leaves you. And yeah, both my first associate pastor role and my role as pastor are just still kind of there. That's the first love.
Where were you, Pastor?
St. Mary's, Menominee Falls. It was a beautiful assignment because the parish was in difficult shape. I was the 5th priest in 3 years. And so the parish, they had guys leave, they had guys turn over, guys just didn't want to stay. The parish thought something was wrong with them. There was nothing wrong with them. It was just unhealthy priests or situations that needed to be changed. And so all I had to do was walk in and let them know that I love them, the Lord loved them, and just learn how to walk together. And so I only got 3 years, but it was a perfect assignment. It was only 3 weekend masses. The church was full for all of them because it was a big parish, but I could handle it alone. We had a great school, a lot of kids, and just a ton of apostolates that we were able to kind of expand on throughout those 3 years. So it was a dream. And Archbishop Listecki, to his credit, knew that it would be, he's like, I want to give you a great assignment because you're probably going to have to go back for studies eventually. And I just didn't want to think about that, but he picked out a beautiful place for me, and I'll be forever grateful because that's an unforgettable joy of pastoring at St. Mary's.
When you were there, obviously you were building on the foundations of others who had come before you. You were carrying out the basic program that a pastor in every parish is supposed to do. But was there a particular initiative that you started there, or something a seed that had already been planted that you watered, that you're particularly proud of, that had your fingerprints all over it?
Yeah, I mean, in general, restoring the liturgy or getting rid of some of the strange innovations that had woven their way in, and exercising the holy water and setting up a set of just securities against the enemy within the parish. Obviously, I think that's basic to exercise the full authority of the pastor and claiming that space for the Lord and casting out everything that's come against the good of God. But at the time, this is 2015, 16, 17, small groups were really not normative yet. And I had launched small groups at my last parish with a training group of 8 different small group leaders. At St. Mary's, I saw that it was fruitful to walk with them, and I decided to invest much more heavily in my leaders. And so I took a full year and met once a week for 2 hours in the evening with a group of 12. And I just taught them everything I learned in seminary, walked through the scriptures, walked through the catechism, walked through some other resources. It was a tremendous commitment of time. There's a lot of meetings I couldn't make or things I couldn't attend. But I said, I'm going to invest in the best I can find, give them everything I have, so they can go out and do this, and they don't need to come to me for all the answers. There's certain things they need to come to me for, but I want to empower them to be disciples.
We're doing small groups on scripture study, on study of the catechism, on books.
All the above. They moved into books. They started with scripture, a number of resources from CCO and from Focus, moved through the catechism, and then now just kind of reading groups. And it's perpetuated. I mean, one of them is ordained a deacon now, a permanent deacon. One of them went on to be the headmaster at one of our academies. They got on the parish council. They came into the parish staff. They all got much more engaged and became serious leaders. But from the practice side of things, I never felt like more a pastor and more a father than in those meetings, because I could hone in on just a little group of people. A lot of the parish said, like, that's a lot of time, can you come to our thing or this thing? So I suffered a little bit of skepticism about it, whether it was worth the time and why I couldn't do other things. But I just knew I have to invest in a small group of people and give them everything that I've received and everything that I can. And it was, in hindsight, absolutely fulfilling, delightful, and totally fruitful. I mean, these people are all still on fire. Their marriages, their families, two of their kids, one of their kids is in seminary now, and another's discerning. So just absolutely worth investing heavily in a small group that can really lead with you and run with you.
So you're ripped out of this assignment. You're sent over to get your doctorate in Rome. You come back, and Archbishop Listecki makes you a vocation director in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, likewise at the seminary, I think, at the same time. Talk to us about that assignment, promoting vocations, both among future priests as well as future religious.
Yeah, so we had a vocation director who's also a dear friend of mine, and he needed a half-time help. So he asked the Archbishop if I could be the vocation promoter, we call it, doing the running around stuff and not the office stuff. So the other half-time, while I was in Rome, I encountered women religious, and I had a profound experience, especially the first time I went to the Missionaries of Charity, the soup kitchen adjacent to the Holy Spirit in the Vatican building. And just there, washing dishes, cleaning things up, setting up the tables for the group of men that were coming to eat. But seeing the superior of that community, I remember I felt like my heart was being rewired as I encountered this religious woman, because I looked at her. She was on fire with love of the Lord, totally confident in that claim, absolutely feminine, but also fiercely strong. Like, she bossed around the drunk homeless men. She called the seminarians out for wearing too much cologne or flirting with the other volunteers. She loved everybody in tenderness, but she was such a woman. And I remember thinking to myself, I have never seen a woman like that. And I think I've always been looking for that in my mother, my friends, my girlfriends. I was looking for, like, the ideal of woman to show me who I am and who I'm not. And I found that in her, an image of the bride that just sculpted everything for me. So around that same time, I started doing Steubenville conferences. Vocations calls at the end of the conference were always very beautiful, but we had all these young women who would come up and say, I'm open to a vocation. And they were typically not sisters at those conferences. So I'm coming home from Rome. I say, Archbishop, I think there's a crisis in the church and we're asleep at the wheel. The Holy Spirit's moving. He's calling young women to discern, young women who have never seen a sister. They haven't been around them. It's not a part of the ethos of the church in the average parish and diocesan setting. And that falls to the diocesan structures to steward that. And I don't think diocesan structures have taken account of that activity of the Holy Spirit and what it takes to accompany young women in vocational discernment when we don't have many women religious around anymore. So could we try something? Could I have this other halftime where when I go to the high school, not only will I have pizza with the guys, but I'll also do something for the girls separately and give them resources and maybe bring sisters in with me from outside of my diocese? Could we try to do both? So it's not just I'm taking care of the guys and someone else will take care of the girls, but really no one's taking care of the girls. So he put me in that spot for 3 years. And the women's side with retreats as well for women's religious, and then the vocation side just kept growing and growing and growing until eventually I said, Archbishop, I think there's more than a full-time assignment here in helping the church realize that we have to think through this question about women's vocations in the absence of sisters if we ever want sisters back. And so that's what gets me to where I am.
So as a result of the way that the Lord had been leading you through what you were doing for women religious that was continuously growing, eventually you thought that the Lord was calling you to found Friends of the Bridegroom. Talk to us about Friends of the Bridegroom, what that means as a biblical expression to describe the priesthood as a whole, and then talk about the brides you've been trying to help.
Yeah, so I'll come to the title in a second because it's actually really important for understanding the whole picture. But it was those encounters with sisters during seminary where I realized I started to love serving the poor and going out on mission. By the time I was a priest, I would go to the sisters and say, do you need English Mass anywhere in the world of your communities that don't have priests? And so they would send me to with another buddy, we'd go to Romania, Armenia, just offer Mass. And I was delighting in the ministry, but I was lamenting that I'd grown up without that I couldn't get all my priest buddies to come and experience this and notice, like the way Bishop Cousins put it a couple years ago, I quote him on this a lot now. He said, because he worked with the MCs a lot too, he said, when I was around these sisters, they looked at me and they saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I wanted to become the priest that they saw when they looked at me. And I wasn't him yet, but I wanted to be that man. And that explained to me what I was experiencing as well. These holy consecrated women were calling the priesthood out of me and making me want to be a better man, a better priest, a better servant, more generous. And I was upset that I hadn't had that experience, and that all of my diocesan brothers back home where we didn't have sisters were not experiencing that. And I just started to think about the history of things, and in the absence of that, like, how do you understand the fact that the priest is, as John Paul II's documents, and now even the Ratio, the priest is supposed to love the church with the same love with which Christ loves her. The church longs to be loved as a bride, and we're configured to the heart of the bridegroom. That's very abstract, and can get a little bit weird if you misinterpret that, until you have a robust Marian theology in place. And what helps us understand Our Lady, who's also somewhat abstract, statues and paintings and icons. What helps to understand that is the living icon, which is the woman who's consecrated and thus embodies and personifies the bride and shows us something of this high biblical theological reality that the church is the bride of Christ. I'm supposed to love the church the way Christ loves her. So that's all in place. Friends of the bridegroom, the title comes from John the Baptist, who in John 3 says, I'm not the bridegroom. He's the bridegroom. I'm his best friend, and I help the bride get ready, remember that she's called, remember that he's coming, get ready for the wedding, but as soon as he's there, I get out of the way. And that has to be the role of the priest. Otherwise, you confuse this, and you act like always the bridegroom. In sacramental moments, the priest is the bridegroom. He's configured to Christ, but in preaching and in counseling, you're the friend of the bridegroom. And so to help priests understand that we flourish in relationship to consecrated women, there's a dyadic complementarity to our supernatural states. Absent the feminine, the church atrophies, forgets herself, but also the priest atrophies, becomes, as a priest friend of mine put it, like a single dad, or a man who's just trying to run a family without a mother around. A lay friend of ours, one of our supporters, when I explained, it took like an hour to explain the metaphysics and everything at his level that he wanted it. And he said, so in summary, in one sentence, what you're saying to me is that the church without sisters is like a family without a mother. And I'm like, yes, thank you for the one sentence summary of the high metaphysical semi-PhD that I just presented to you, the dissertation. So that's on the priest side, but also working with sisters over the years and doing a lot of direction, a lot of retreats, going back to the beginning since Rome. I noticed even the sisters, who the title Bride of Christ is a little bit more obvious for them, but I noticed they were also not always able to understand what that means, or not really able to embrace or live in that. And when I'm sitting and praying with the Song of Songs, a friend of mine pointed out years ago now, the bride refers to her beloved as her friend also. She says, such is my beloved and such is my friend. So the realization that the love of friendship, or friendship with Christ, has to be at the center of a renewal. And the celibate states are signs of the wedding feast, but complementary and distinct. There's a masculine participation in the wedding feast, which is Christological, and a feminine, which is ecclesiological, Mariological. You take either one of those out, and the other one has to balance and shift and distort and misunderstand. And the recognition over the years has been that there's an ecosystemic relationship between all the vocational states. Marriage and family needs holy priests and holy consecrated women. Holy priests need the other two. Holy consecrated women need the other two. And all of us rise and fall together. When all of the states are healthy and we all are mutually solicitous for one another's well-being, the church is whole and is flourishing. You take one out, and everything has to shift and rebalance, organizationally, but also metaphysically. And the movement of Friends of the Bridegroom grows out of the fact that most of the church is atrophied, is metaphysically sick, not just we're organizationally sick too. Having lost sisters, we never really recovered our structures. Hiring teachers and staffs that we never had to hire before, that's an organizational shift. But the metaphysical shift is much more grave. The church doesn't even understand herself as a bride. So how do we understand these scriptures that tell us that's where we're going, a wedding feast? So it's to recover that deep sense in priests and sisters of what it means to be consecrated, what it means to point out the wedding feast of the Lamb, what it means to try to awaken all of creation to that, especially the church, and then what it means to, in the presence of an atrophy, in the loss of sisters and consecrated women, what does it mean for us to think through that gap and set up structures and playbooks and strategies to help everything rebalance by bringing back the consecrated woman to the place that we need her to occupy in the church if we're all going to be well.
So, in order to understand the programs that are coming on out and the particular apostolate that you're doing for the entire church, can you give us a little bit of a survey of the strengths and the weaknesses of women's religious life? Let's stick just to the United States of America. How are women religious basically doing? What's dying? What's growing?
Yeah, so by pure numbers, we have a lot of women religious who are elderly and are going to be passing away in the next 10 and 20 years. Stats are very difficult to really pin down on, but it's about between 70 and 80% of consecrated women in the U.S. are over 80. 80 or over. So we're going to see a long slide in numbers. Right now, the chart, if you just chart out vocations, priestly vocations since the 60s are on a decline, but it's not terrible. Women religious, it's a 45-degree decline. It's just a dive, and that's going to keep diving. It's going to come way beneath the priests. But as that's happening, we have about 120 communities in a group called the CMSWR that a lot of you guys have probably heard of.
Council of Major Superiors of Women Religious is what the acronym stands for.
Thanks for translating and interpreting for me along the way, Monsignor. That group is vibrant, very vibrant. There are a lot of young women entering these communities. At a recent meeting in Rome, it became clear that in the English-speaking world, the only vital council of women religious is this CMSWR, vital meaning growing, has life, new vocations, and has a future. So America bucks the trend of the rest of the English-speaking world in that our religious communities, at least a segment of them, are growing. And the Holy See's not quite sure what to do with that. Like it's a very profound sign of the strength of the church in America and that we've turned a corner. And I'm convinced that God is asking the church in America to be a beacon for the nations, for the rest of the world, about what it is to live holy, ecclesiological, Mariological, consecrated living.
Give some examples. You're not going to give over 100 communities, but what are some of the examples of thriving women's religious communities in the U.S. in case those listening to us, and certainly priests, would be able to say, yeah, that's what he's talking about?
Sure, yeah. So the Sisters of Life, who a lot of us have seen at big events, the Carmelites of Alhambra, Los Angeles, the Nashville Dominicans, the Ann Arbor Dominicans, each of them have more formal titles or names, but that's kind of how they're known. Soul Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity. All these communities they have young women coming who are talented and capable of doing many other things. There's not a default, but they're blossoming. The dilemma is, though, they need more. Like if we're, a simple example of the need. One of these communities tells me they have a waiting list of over 400 bishops, parishes, and schools that have requested their sisters. They are able to open right now at most one community per year. So a huge mismatch in supply and demand. And what they say to us, me and the ministry, is we only have access to the families that we know. Diocesan structures cover the whole country. You have access to everybody. If you can come to understand our lives, our charisms, our communities, and bring that to your people, the women that the Lord is calling are going to be aware of us, the women that we can't get to. And you, diocesan priests, are the bridge for us. And we will be able to cross hundreds of names off that list if you'll help us. But we just can't do it on our own. And so there's this real need to partner up with these communities and as priests to be brothers to our sisters and say, hey, how can I help you? And I'm sorry that my older brothers either didn't say that or didn't ask that question or asked it in the wrong way 30 and 40 years ago. And we're in the situation that we're in now. Like, let's not repeat that.
So how are Friends of the Bridegroom actually helping them as they tell you what they need and we need?
So we have two main prongs: healing and expansion of women's religious life, which will heal the priesthood. Healing work, partnering especially with the JP2 Healing Center in Tallahassee, Florida. We run 3 retreats a year for the major superiors, and then for their second tier and third tier leadership, and then sisters they send. And we start leadership down. So the superiors go first, then they send their vicars, then their directors and formators. So the communities are coming into a real embrace of the fact that religious life also wasn't working very well before. There was a lot of disorder and a lot of confusion and even spiritual abuse. So if we're going to send women in, we don't want to send them into unhealthy communities. And we did that for a while, and these women got chewed up and spit out, and nobody was worse for it. So you have to work on healing concurrent with any major renewal program or process. So we're doing healing work all throughout the year. We have a house in Milwaukee where Sister Miriam James lives with 2 young women who are in discernment with us, considering consecration to Friends of the Bridegroom. And they receive sisters for one-on-one retreats or individual retreats for healing, in addition to the national retreats that we do. So that's an ongoing labor while we work to create or to craft a set of best practices that we've dialed in on over the last 4 years in Milwaukee. So because I've been able to do this assignment, we've kind of laid out awareness, encounter, and accompaniment. Those are the stages. Like, is the group, the parish, the diocese, is it aware that God still calls? He could call you, he could call your sister, he could call your child. Are you open to that? Is there an awareness? So it's not that by the time they encounter a sister, it's not out of the blue and like, what is that? But it's like, well, I've been thinking about that. I've been praying about that. I've heard some videos or talks on that. And then after that, how do we accompany that? In the absence of sisters, how do we find spiritual directors and families that are open to accompany these young women? So in those 3 tiers, in Milwaukee, we've honed at Bethany House a set of best practices. Currently, we're mentoring 4 different dioceses or individuals within diocese, depending on the situation, to implement what we've done and tell us what's missing. What doesn't make sense about this kind of event, or how to host a community for 4 days, or how to set up a valuable week of having sisters in town that don't normally live there. What can you do to help us broaden up this language so it could be plugged and played in any diocese, any community, any family throughout the church? We're almost done with that. By the end of this year, we'll have that packaged, and then we're just going to offer that to the church, to bishops, to priests, to families, anybody who wants it. It's not going to be anything we charge for, but it's just awareness, encounter accompaniment, strategies for doing the work of renewal in the absence of sisters, so that by the time, 5, 10, 20 years has passed, there isn't an absence of sisters anymore, and we don't need to do this.
One of the things that has struck me over my 26 years as a priest is how few spiritual directors women religious have. Over the course of the quarter of a century, I've had over 50 religious spiritual directees, and I remember one who was a cloistered Dominican, whom I knew when she was 6 and I was 5. I would visit her as I was driving back and forth between Massachusetts and Washington, D.C., and after about 2 years of 2 or 3 visits a year as I was traveling through, she said, "I have a question for you. Would you be my spiritual director?" And I said to her, "Sister, I can't come down here from Massachusetts to see you." This was before you could do Skype spiritual direction, and Zoom or phone isn't, I think, all that fruitful. And she said, "Well, 2 or 3 times would be better than 0. And I asked her, cloistered Dominican, close to a seminary, close to a city with a lot of her religious brothers, like, how many of your sisters lack spiritual directors? She says, "Most." And I was stunned, and I thought back to Blessed Claude de Colombière, now St. Claude de Colombière, and how important he was, in St. Margaret Mary Alacoque's vocation in the Sacred Heart. Are there programs that you're trying to do to help priests and women religious become spiritual directors to women religious and to those with those vocations, so that accompanying piece isn't the missing piece?
Yeah, so you put your finger on a major dilemma there, which is not only is there a shortage of qualified directors, priests often, diocesan priests especially, often don't think they're qualified. They don't think they're capable. I don't understand religious life. I'm not a woman. I don't know how to deal with boundaries, emotions, a different style of prayer. And so a lot of priests will be, I've tried to hand off retreats because I get a lot of retreat requests. I've tried to give these retreats to other guys, so I can't go, could you go? And they don't believe they're holy enough. They don't believe they're equipped for it. So that's very consistent, which is why there's a real shortage of good directors, retreat directors, and spiritual directors. So what we're doing in just this summer, coming up in June, we're going to host our first annual priest conference. We're keeping the first one really small, but just over the last 3 years, really 2.5, about 70 priests have reached out to me to say, "I heard what you're doing. I'd love to learn more. I'd love to help." So we're going to get 25 of them together at a 4-day conference in Milwaukee. And what we're going to do is all the speakers are going to be women religious. And there's 2 full days. One full day will be on the priesthood. Like, what do they see in us that they want us to see that we often don't realize? Like, back to that Cousins quote. And the second day will be on religious life. What do they want us to see in them that we don't see because we're not around them, we didn't grow up with them, we didn't learn about it in seminary? So just forming the men in what it is to be in healthy, holy relationships, and to be more solicitous for the renewal of the bride, specifically by accompaniment, by spiritual direction, for candidates for sisters, and by retreat direction. So put 25 guys into a fraternal setting. We're already over. We're on a waiting list. And just let the sisters teach us. Like back in the day, but now in a spot where we understand a lot of the things that John Paul II was teaching, and we see the Christ in the church now, and to give them a voice to form us priests so that we are not afraid of responding to their requests, that we would be fathers to them, that we would be guides to them, that we could help their communities grow. So we're really excited. We'll do it every year to get bigger, but this year we're keeping it small just to get our feet under us.
So we have a lot of priests, future priests, as well as a lot of very interested lay people in the priesthood listening. What would you say to them in terms of how they may be able to help prosper the very important work of Friends of the Bridegroom?
So we have just relied upon the biblical triad of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. So we have a daily prayer for renewal. We ask people to pray. It's on our website. The website's renewreligious.org, renewreligious.org. And the prayers on there, we've given away 16,000 prayer cards already in the last year. So asking everybody to pray that prayer. It's a prayer just asking God to send us more women religious, more consecrated women, to renew the church that way and to restore the family of God. Fasting, there are a group of priests who fast on Wednesdays already, abstaining from meat or some other sacrifice for the renewal specifically, and laity are offering all different kinds of layers of sacrifice. We've got about 700 lay people who have reached out over the years to say, we want to be with you in this. And then almsgiving, which is either concretely giving your resources, financially or otherwise, material, but then perhaps for priests as well, tithing a week of your year to direct or to accompany or to give a retreat. So prayer, fasting, almsgiving. In the next year, we're going to start a little more formal formation for those groups, and even hopefully have a private association of the faithful, so that priests and laity alike can say, I am praying, I'm fasting, I'm giving alms for the renewal. I can look in the mirror and say, this is what I'm doing to make sure that the church in the future has the consecrated women that the Lord wants her to have.
You had mentioned a little bit earlier that 2 women are presently discerning, consecrating themselves in the house with Sister Miriam. Consecrating themselves to the private association of the faithful, or have you already founded something in church law that has a juridical personality that people can be drawn to?
Not yet, because Archbishop Listecki was leaving. He was turning 75, so let's pause and wait before we start anything new for the next Archbishop, who's just arrived a couple of weeks ago. These 2 women have left their jobs and have no source of income. They're full-time with the mission, driving all the work we're doing with us. And so they just believe it's time to bring this to the bishop and ask him what we should do in terms of structuring that. Should we structure this canonically, and how would you like to father this, Archbishop? And do you see this as we see it? And to bring that under his authority. But the dream, I think the ideal would be to have, a community, a formal community dedicated to the renewal, the healing and renewal of the church through the healing and renewal of priesthood and religious life. And having sisters and even priests who give themselves full time to that labor burns in my heart, and it seems to burn in the hearts of these women. So it'll be fun to watch what the Lord does, but I think we'll see something new grow out of this.
The whole church is watching too. We've got 2 last questions in the few minutes that we have. First question is, over the course of your 15 years this year as a priest of Jesus Christ, what has been the biggest joy for you?
I would say the discovery that I am just not done growing. Learning to sacrifice, learning to encounter my weaknesses and have to ask the Lord to forgive me, to heal me, and experiencing that healing, and discovering that though I'm 15 years in, I'm nowhere near a saint, and I'm nowhere near as good at surrender and trust as I want to be. And rather than accusatory, I found it delightful to realize that, like, at this point in my life, I feel like I'm in formation again. I'm being formed in how to be faithful to a prompting and a calling God's given me that was in the secret of my heart, and I've brought into the church now. And realizing that I just have to always be a novice. The religious will say you're always a novice. I have to always be a novice. I have to always be in formation. And it's delightful, actually, to be like, oh, I'm 15 years out, and there's a lot I don't know, and I want to keep learning. And that includes messing up and needing to heal and turn back to the Lord. And I love that, because that's the frame for the rest of my life.
The concluding question on the Shepherd Circle podcast is always, if there were a young man out there thinking that God might be calling him to be a shepherd after the Good Shepherd's heart, what would you say? But we've got one of the great experts in the country of the promotion of women's religious vocations. So I'd just ask you, what would you say to a young guy thinking that God might be calling him to be a priest? What would you think? What would you say to a young woman? What do you say to a young woman who's thinking that she might have a religious vocation, in terms of what to do with it practically? What's the next step or next couple of steps?
I mean, the openness of the heart of a consecrated vocation is so radically countercultural, and it makes no sense in the light of our secular world. A bishop once said, if you experience an openness to a consecrated calling, priesthood, religious life, that openness is not coming from the devil. It's not coming from the world. It's typically not coming from your friends. It's coming from God. And so to flee that or to neglect that will always cost you. We see people much later in life who look back and wonder if they should have discerned. They experience something they're afraid of. They shut it down. If there's an openness in your heart, you want to sit in that openness and say, God, I don't maybe want to be a priest or religious, but do you, Lord, want that? And just watch and see how he responds. And then put yourself in the presence of good priests and good sisters. Ask those questions, realizing that today we're not about recruiting. It's not about numbers. It's about the will of God that has already determined the best life for you. Like, God knows from the womb what he's made you for. And if he's calling you, it's going to be a long and steady journey of the church walking with you. And there'll be many moments where you choose to say yes to it and are given the opportunity to depart from it before it's permanent. So you don't have to have great certainty, but if there's an openness, you want to bring that up into the church and let the church assist you in raising these questions and testing out the possibility of a call. Because if he's called you, there will be no other life on earth that could satisfy you as much as consecration or ordination. And from our experience on the podcast here and here at the Shepherd Circle, I mean, because I'm called to be a priest, I can say this: the priesthood is the greatest thing on earth for me. Like, if you're not called to it, it's not going to be the greatest thing for you. But being called, it is absolutely a gift that I can't believe I resisted or was afraid of and almost said no to, because I couldn't dream of a life that would fulfill me more than the life that I've been called to.
It's been wonderful having you on the program, Father John Burns from the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, to describe Friends of the Bridegroom, which my hope is in several centuries, everybody in the church will know not just the biblical reference to the best men who were supporting Jesus the Bridegroom, but also the concrete reference of something that started in the U.S. in our lifetime and has spread throughout the entire world to renew the church through renewing this motherly aspect of the church, which is enfleshed in the life of so many young women who say yes to that call of the bridegroom.
Amen. Fiat. Let it be.
So please join us in praying not just for shepherds after Jesus' heart and to encourage the young men you know who show signs of a vocation to ask Jesus in prayer whether Jesus might be calling them to serve him, the church, and the world as ordained priests, but also all the young women of our parishes, of our families, in our classrooms, in our Catholic schools and religious education programs, so that they might imitate Mary's wholehearted yes to God's plan, because one 14-year-old girl was able, through her fiat, to change the history of the world. And imagine what would happen if the whole church, as the bride of Christ, were to become that living echo. Please check back next week for an interview with another hardworking priest in the vineyard of the Lord, who we pray bears great fruit. I am Monsignor Roger Landry, and I've been delighted to be your host today on the Shepherd Circle podcast. Talk to you soon.
Thanks again for joining us today. For more information about how you can join us in supporting our work with clergy and religious, go to napa-institute.org. May God bless you this day and always.